Welcome to Third Floor Views, a production of Chesapeake Family Life, where we talk about health, education, and living with kids. I'm your host, Janet Jefferson. Have you ever wondered what it takes to get an oyster onto your plate, or who the people are involved in supplying your food? Or do you maybe know a kid who's in love with the water and is dreaming about potential careers? Well, joining us today is Imani Black, founder of Minorities in Aquaculture, and she is here to discuss all of those things and much, much more. Thank you so much, Imani, for being here with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
To our viewers, please feel free to submit any questions that you might have in the comments section, and we'll try to get to as many as we can. Let's jump right in. So first, Imani, I wanted to talk a little bit about what is aquaculture. And I know, some people might be really familiar with that term. Some people might be like, I have no idea what we're talking about today. So if you could just talk a little bit about the big picture. So what is aquaculture? And then maybe about what a typical day might look like for a water woman. And maybe I know the typical is a tough one. So maybe thinking about what does it look like as the seasons go by.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, basically, to put it in layman's terms, aquaculture is just the production of marine aquatic organisms in a controlled environment through breeding, rearing, and harvesting and grow out. So basically, when you're getting oysters, they have gone through a whole life cycle depending on what farm you're getting them from. Some farms have the capacity to have a hatchery, which is the beginning stages where larval, like baby oysters, are made, all the way up to, the nursery. Some organizations just have the facilities and the permits just for the nursery, and then some people just have a farm. So it just all depends on what size and what scale your oyster farm is operating from. But mostly, your oysters have gone through the whole different stages of farm raised. I kind of laugh sometimes at the typical question or the typical day question, just because we're working with Mother Nature, we're working with, machines, and most importantly, we're working with a live organism that has its own, triumphs and pitfalls and things like that, and its kind of own survivalship and things that it needs to thrive and to get to on your plate. So when you're dealing with all of those things, it's never a typical day. You kind of go in with I have a clear idea or a little bit of a clear idea of what my daily task is going to be, but it just all depends. One day a machine might not work, or one day your oysters just aren't happy or they're not eating, and it's just kind of a job where you have to like roll with the punches and really gather the information that's being shown to you for that day and then adapt accordingly.
So talking about gathering information, do you feel like, especially with your background, is there a lot of science involved in your job? What aspect of it is more art or maybe more science?
Yeah, I mean, the whole thing really is science. So I've been fortunate enough in my career to work in all different stages of aquaculture, primarily mostly in the hatchery, which is all science based. So some hatcheries are, like I said, are different depending on the scale, but the hatcheries that I've worked in, we have grown our own food for our baby oysters. We have conditioned the mom and dad oysters or the brood stock to be viable to create those baby oysters. So a lot of it in that controlled space is a lot of science. We're doing math on feeding patterns, on temperature, salinity. We're doing just growth rates, anything that could affect what's going on and the kind of trajectory of what your oyster is going to go through by the time they get on your plate. We have to be aware of it and we kind of have to work with it. So a lot of the beginning stages are very science based, and then a lot of the kind of later stages are just more labor environmental like kind of spaces.
Mhm, mhm. So as you're doing this, I have this image in my head and I'm sure it's not quite right. So how much are you actually working outside in the environment versus maybe what some people think about, like what a fish farm might look like, where maybe it's a big warehouse with lots of tanks? Where do you fall in that? And how much of it are you working with Mother Nature, as in like the wind and the rain and the salinity of the water and all of that stuff? Or how much do you actually control in something more structured like a tank?
Right. So, I mean, I think that's one of my most favorite parts of being an oyster farmer, is that it's always outside. Yeah, granted, I'm not a cold person. So, like, we do have to go out when it's snowing and sleeting, which is why I'm such a, promoter of thank your farmers, because when it
Mm,
is outside and it is snowing and raining and you're like, I don't want to walk the dog, I don't want to exercise, I don't want to do this, your farmers are out there doing what they have to do to get you the food resources that you need. So hatchery, nursery, and farm are all outside. Hatchery is where the tanks are. And so it's more of like an enclosed, more like open garage type of warehouse, but
hmm.
we are pulling water in from the natural resource and then filtering it out so that by the time it gets to the baby oysters or the adult, it doesn't have any of those harmful chemicals or algal blooms or anything like that could deteriorate their success in the hatchery. Once they get out into the nursery, that is their first type of just raw water introduction. So anything that is in the water, they're filtering out, they're feeding, and that's like the nursery stage is when they first get their first viable kind of taste of what your natural environment is like. Also, fun fact, that is the start of where your oysters get their flavor from. So a lot of like oyster companies have a flavor profile that they like to market. That is the stage where it really starts to happen. A lot when they're intaking all those nutrients and then depositing kind of those things, that flavor stays in their gills and their body content, so that's where it gets started.
Right. And when we talk about local food and the idea of sort of place-based, and I know this is really common when you talk about, wine and people talk about terroir. Well, oysters are the same, right? That's exactly what you're talking about, that you're tasting the environment
Mhm.
when you're eating that oyster. And I know when you go to a fancy restaurant and they're like, oh, these are, Wakamako oysters and they taste this way, or these are, such and such oysters and they taste that way.
Right.
And you do a tasting and you can really taste the difference, which is so cool to think that, food that is coming from specific places really reflects that flavor. I love that so much.
Yeah.
Can we talk just a little bit more about the life cycle of an oyster and how that plays into your day or your year? So in terms of talking about that typical day aspect, does it change based on the season? And like, how long is the life cycle of an oyster really when you're dealing with it? So from the beginning, maybe to, when they're teeny tiny or even like an egg stage to all the way to harvest point. And how long does that take? And what is entailed in caring for them in that process?
Yeah, well, I work with farm raised oysters. So the one of the main attractions with aquaculture and farm raised oysters is that they're sterile. So they have no oyster season per se. The wild population has the R months and all of that stuff. But aquaculture really wants to have oysters that are all year round. When
Hmm.
it comes to seasonal work, I've been really fortunate to be at oyster companies that are organization and our operation are medium to large size, but our staff isn't. So we've gotten the chance to work in the hatchery season, close up the hatchery. So the hatchery opens up between January all the way to September, sometimes October. And so we're just pumping out oyster larvae at that point between those months. Really between March and or February to September is like really when oysters are being reared.
Mhm.
From there, in the fall time and like in the beginning of winter time, that's when they're in the nursery. And then that's when we're really trying to push out all of the last little oysters that are just having a little bit of trouble growing to get on the farm. We're really giving them the attention that they need to kind of get through before the winter months come. Then during the winter months, I was really fortunate to work on the farm, and that stage is really when we're putting out millions and millions of oysters into on our leases in the bay. And that's when they're in their cages and in bags, and that's where they'll stay for the majority of their life until they get on plates or they're shucked for pints or anything
Mhm.
like that.
Mhm.
And so that is basically all of winter, and then until January, that's when we start going back into the hatchery. So it is a year-round type of type of thing, but I love it so much because then I get to kind of be really hands-on with all the different stages that our oysters are going through, and I kind of get to be hands-on the entire year, which is great.
Definitely. So what's your favorite part?
Oh, that's okay. So there's kind of two different parts of my career right now. Um, let's say before MIA and then after MIA. So before MIA, when I was just doing oyster farming, my favorite part was working on boats all day, like being outside all day. I've worked in some of the most beautiful places on the Eastern Shore, and I never get over it. It never gets old, especially when you have like direct connections to them. Over the last 2 years, I didn't know it at the time, but I was actually working in my family's kind of lineage area, Crapo,
Oh,
Wingate,
that's so
all the
cool.
lower parts of Cambridge. And I had no idea. So I was going, my mom actually told me the other day that every time I would go to work over the last 2 years, I was actually passing my great great grandfather's house that he was born in, and I had no idea. So that's been really cool. And I think probably my least favorite part in the other half is that I don't get to be kind of outside all day
Mm-hmm.
every day.
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's jump right in. And I really want to hear more about MIA, so Minorities in Aquaculture. Tell us about this organization that you started, and how did you decide to start Minorities in Aquaculture, and what's the mission, and how's it going?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's been a long, long journey. I actually had the idea for Minorities in Aquaculture back in January of 2020. And then, all the uncertainties of 2020 and kind of all the ups and downs, I had a lot of time in May of 2020 to like really dedicate to it. And so I was really driven by it because of everything that was going on, in the country, with everyone, minorities and just everyone, and kind of the things that were happening on the news. I was being really affected by them as a person of color and my own struggles of being a person of color in this world. And so I really started to ask people in my space and of all years of experience in aquaculture, when is the last time you saw a person of color in a leadership role in aquaculture other than me? Because at the time I was an assistant hatchery manager and I had never worked with another person of color, a woman of color, man of color, nothing. And so once I started asking that question and no one really could give me an answer, I was like, okay, well, maybe like this is something that's like actually really needed. It wasn't until, thankfully, a lot of, huge oyster operations and organizations were putting out their statements for, police brutality, Black Lives Matter, and all that. And I really was happy about that. But in those statements, there were sections of, we're going to start having conferences and forums on how we can make aquaculture more diverse. And like I said, I think that the conversation is great. I think the statements were very appreciated. But my first thought when I read those things were, well, how are people who don't look like their target audience going to bring in those people? Because we all go through different struggles, especially Black and Brown communities. We're all going through our own struggles. And so it was right then and there that I was like, this is a lot bigger than me. I need to step out of my own way with this like kind of imposter syndrome. And I just need to do it because this is something that's going to be way bigger than me and anything that I ever thought that I was going to do. And so Minorities in Aquaculture is basically just an extension of my own career aspirations and kind of what I needed when I was getting into aquaculture of empowerment and support and just like a longevity of resources. So Minorities in Aquaculture, our efforts want to educate women of color of all ages about the sustainability efforts locally and globally of aquaculture. Aquaculture is the focal point for our sustainable seafood. And no, yes, I am targeting just one demographic, but to me, it's not about race, it's not about color. It's that aquaculture and our sustainable seafood are so important to everybody, regardless of race and ethnicity, that everybody should be exposed to it. Everyone should have some type of knowledge of what's going on in their environment and how it affects them. And so I just want to give people the opportunity, if they want to, at a very young age and at whatever stage they are in their environmental kind of journey, to have these, internships and hands-on aquaculture programs, mentorships. So pretty much I just wanted to create minorities in aquaculture as a step through the door. I never want to project my own career onto other people. I just want to be able to be honest about the missteps that I've had and kind of the misdirections that I've had to kind of navigate through and say, this is how I got here. And here are the different, kind of aspects of aquaculture. They are limitless. Whatever you want to do and whatever you want to succeed in, let's see if we can help you. And let's see what we can do for you. So really it's giving people their success on their own terms. And I feel like that's just been the most powerful thing to me, because a lot of people can really contribute to the aquaculture community, not just by being a farmer, but in marketing and advertising and, communications and infrastructure and just everything. So I just want to give people the opportunity to be able to do that if they want to.
Absolutely. I can really see the potential of breadth and depth involved, and
Yeah.
that being, a resource, being an opportunity for networking, an educational opportunity, both within the communities of color, but then also beyond, how to support Black businesses and thinking within aquaculture. It seems almost limitless, but in a really exciting way.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
Could you speak just a little bit about what is it like being a woman and a person of color in aquaculture? Some of the stats out there are a little bit astonishing. Like I read there are only 10 Black boat captains in the Chesapeake area, and they're all men and they're all over 50. So thinking about where is the future in aquaculture, and how can we empower young people to get involved and find ownership? And then also and you're going to have to correct me if I'm wrong, but you are the only Black woman in aquaculture from the East Coast to Texas. Is that true?
That fact has been thrown at me a lot here lately. I have a really hard time accepting it because I've never really thought of myself as the only one, and I've kind of, until I've been on this mission really of I know that there is another Black female that is out there. She just maybe doesn't have internet. She's out doing her job, in the swamps, whatever. And I've been making the joke of I'm gonna be walking through those swamps in my muck boots and being like, where have you been? I've been looking for you. They've been telling me I'm the only one. That can't be true. And I'm going to give you the platform that you deserve. But yeah, I don't take that lightly as well. So it's kind of on both sides, but being an oyster farmer as a woman has had its challenges. I don't want to lie about that. I've had really great experiences, and I've had experiences that haven't been so great. Sometimes because of the lack of women in aquaculture, and I've had this conversation with many women of aquaculture that I know that are incredible, is that we don't even get kind of split up and kind of, demographic, because there are few women. So sometimes it's only mattered that I'm a woman on a farm when it comes to activities and what people think I can do on the farm, what people think I can't do. And then sometimes it's only mattered that I'm African American. So it's really been kind of a toss up. But I think that just in general, that is why I wanted to kind of create a safe space for women of color, and just women in general, to have these conversations, to really be able to be outspoken about their experiences, because a lot of women have gone through a lot of really horrific things in this male-dominant field of marine science. And it's about time that they have the platform to be able to share those experiences, so that it doesn't happen to women anymore. But also so that we can start healing the women that are really in these spaces, because they are powerful. I know some incredible women in aquaculture who every time I get together with them, I'm just like, you're my friend? Oh my God. I'm like, oh wow. I just, they just, my friends in general, but especially women in aquaculture, they literally make me want to do more. Like, I feel like if I'm going to be friends with them, and if I'm going to be partnering with them and associated with them, I have to be doing my part. I have to be stepping up to the plate because they're doing great things. And like, I feel like I would be disrespectful to them if like I just was like coming to their table like, yeah, just was hanging out today, and they're like out there trying to change the world. So yeah, it's just been, I've gotten to connect with a lot of women that that I had relationships with before. I've gotten an opportunity to reconnect with them, and just also new women that are kind of groundbreaking in their own respect and in their own kind of lane of aquaculture. So that's been, really amazing.
Mhm. Could you tell us just a little bit about your personal journey on how you got to where you are today? How how you became interested in aquaculture and marine science, and maybe some of the mentors or inspirations that you had along the way.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure a lot of people, know by now. There's been a ton of publications out there about my story, but to make a long story short, I've wanted to be in the environment for since I was little. I've been really interested in it. That's been the only thing that I've actually wanted to do for a very long time, and I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I didn't really know what kind of direction or path I wanted to take my career in. Luckily, when I went to college, I got the opportunity to. I thought I wanted to be a tropical biologist. I thought
Hmm.
that was like the coolest thing. I wanted to travel around to all these cool places and learn about all these like exotic animals and save the planet. And so I actually had to study abroad trip the summer going into my senior year to in Belize, where we were there for quite a while, and I got to study sea urchins and swim on patch reefs pretty much like every day, and get all of these experiences. And by the end of that, I kind of realized that I didn't really want to get into academia right away.
Hmm.
I just felt like I could have more of an impact doing, on the groundwork. And that's what I really wanted to do. And so I actually, after that, had an internship with the Chesapeake Bay Foundation doing oyster restoration and fell head over heels. Was like, this is what I'm doing for the rest of my life. I don't even care if I don't even get paid anything. This is what I want to do. And a token to that was the women that it was a all female crew,
Oh,
and
so cool.
all of that. And just being in their space, and like just like in their presence, I was like, yeah, this is what I've been missing my whole life. Like, this is what I love. And we just were like going out every day, doing things in the community that were just amazing. And they were just amazing people in general. But Chesapeake Bay Foundation doesn't have a lot of turnover, and there a lot of people want to work for them. And luckily, my boss at the time was like, oh, if you're really into oyster restoration, you should really look at getting into the commercial side. And we were at Virginia Institute of Marine Science. That was our base at the time. And she was like, this institution right here has this oyster aquaculture training program with this really famous geneticist named Stan Allen. And, it's a really great, a really great program. You should check it out. At the time, I was still in school. I was playing lacrosse and I was still taking classes. And so I went to him and I was like, hey, this is my schedule. I really don't want to take somebody else's opportunity since I can't be here all the time. So if I have to wait a year, that's totally cool. I can do that. And luckily they were willing to work with me, and they, accepted me into the program that year. And it was a 6-month program of just all things aquaculture. So like I was saying, hatchery, nursery, farm, everything. And that was my first real introduction to aquaculture. And then it just kind of really fell into place after that. I got a job working on the eastern shore of Virginia after that. And I was there for a year, and then ended up moving back to Maryland and was working for Maryland Environmental Service out on Poplar Island in Tillman
Mhm. Mhm.
for about a year, and then realized that like I really love aquaculture and I missed what I was doing before. And so then for the last 2 years, I was, working for the first privately owned hatchery in Cambridge, Maryland. So, and that, all of it was a really great experience. But I think that a lot of things, especially in this new stage of my career, I've had to really work through a lot of the different kind of aspects that I had to survive in, when
Mhm.
being, the only Black girl in a predominantly white community, in a predominantly white school. I played lacrosse, which is a predominantly white sport when I was growing up, and that was a struggle. And so being in another predominantly white career, I've really had to work through a lot of things, really, let go of a lot of, like, things about, how I was, like, kind of showing up in my relationships personally and professionally, how I was operating, how it was, like, my mindset, everything. I
Mhm.
didn't really realize that I had really was sitting in a lot of people's opinions and perceptions of me,
Mhm.
and that, were, some of them were true, some of them weren't true. But the ones that weren't true, that were really hurtful to hear, I really sat in them, and really that became a part of my personality. And so minorities in aquaculture is kind of like my redemption to all of the years that, like, I wasn't showing up the way that I was supposed to. The not seriousness that I kind of had when I was kind of going through my own little thing, like as a 21, 22-year-old, just being young. And so I
Yeah.
just wanted to kind of just redeem all of that and say, yeah, I've made a lot of mistakes. I've really made some parts of my life really hard for myself. And I've let a lot of people dictate what I was going to do and what I wasn't going to do. And so
Mhm.
now I'm going back to grad school, which is something I never thought I was going to do. I have a nonprofit organization, which I never, if you had told me this even 2 years ago, I would have been like, you were lying. It's not like, because it's not true. But now that I'm here, I'm just like, wow, all of those things, all of those missteps,
Mhm.
all of those, mishaps were just leading me up to here. So I'm just so grateful for the journey in general at this point.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
So what advice do you have for young Black and brown girls who are interested in the outdoors, in water, in marine science, in aquaculture?
Yeah, just try it out. If you don't know what you want to do, that's totally fine. You will learn as you go that what you love and what you don't love. And the most important thing about jumping into the, marine sciences is that you do find out what you don't love to do, which
Hmm.
is just as important as finding out what you do love to do. But also, it's a male dominated field. Like, get out there. If you're kind of like being shy when you're at the farm or on a boat or whatever, my best advice is just to jump in. Just jump in. Jump into the chaos, jump into, the work labor, because aquaculture, being a waterman, being an oyster farmer is all about earning your stripes. And women are, every time we step into those spaces, we are not only earning our stripes, we are changing the perspective and kind of like the image of what people think women can do in hard, in like labor intense spaces. But also, most important thing is, don't let anybody tell you what you can and cannot do. I've had a lot of people that have told me that I wasn't smart enough to be in marine biology. I should have been a communications major. That, I didn't have what it took to be a hatchery manager. I didn't have what it took to do this or do that. And luckily, with the support system that I had, I didn't, I just kept pushing. Even though those things were really hurtful, I just kept pushing through, because I've always had this burning passion for what I wanted to do. And that is the main thing with minorities in aquaculture, is that I want to be people's support system. So one, don't let anybody tell you what you can and cannot do. People will try to deter you from your own path because of their own insecurities, and that is totally okay. Hear what they have to say, take it with a grain of salt, and do whatever you want to do and what you are going to love, and like what's going to bring you peace and happiness throughout your day. Because at the end of the day, you have to wake up and do your job. Nobody else has to get out of your bed, drive in your car to do your job every day. So that's my main things in life, are really just reiterating some of those things.
Incredible.
Yeah.
Um, One last question. How can we as a community support you? So thinking about minorities in aquaculture, thinking about Black and brown businesses, thinking about getting more women and girls of color into aquaculture, how can the community support the work that you're doing right now?
Yeah, I think one of the most important things is educating ourselves about what Black and brown communities have really done for our seafood industry. A lot of people don't know, including myself when I was growing up, I didn't know that I had my own legacy and my own generations before me that were doing what I'm trying to do now. You know, African Americans, indigenous people, just the minority community in general has done so much for the seafood industry over the years. And we have just been kind of taken out of those history lessons. So one thing would be to support minorities in aquaculture is to educate yourself about what's actually going on and the history of how the evolution of the Chesapeake Bay got to where it is today. But also, if you know any, Black or brown young girls or girls in general that like want to get into marine science, that want to try it out, we will have a ton of opportunities in the upcoming months that are going to give people the opportunity to really step foot and explore and just be exposed to it. So my contact information, I'm sure will be like linked somewhere. But
Absolutely.
yeah, just shoot me an email. I love having conversations. I love talking to people about how we can help them. But yeah, basically, we're taking donations. We are partnering with people that kind of are aligning with the same core beliefs that we have of really pushing diversity and inclusion for the longevity, not just for the right now.
Mhm.
But yeah, just overall support, word of mouth, donations, sending kids like over to minorities in aquaculture so we can really get some attentive action started towards diversity and inclusion now.
Absolutely. Oh, I love it. I love your mission. It's so awesome. And
Thank
my
you.
gosh, so much work. And also just a huge thank you for everything that you're doing, whether that be providing the community with food to finding ways to uplift women
Yeah.
and women of color. Well, thank you, huge thank you to Imani Black for taking the time to talk to us today about your story and about minorities in aquaculture. Thank you to all of our viewers and listeners as well. Make sure that you do visit ChesapeakeFamily.com for up-to-date local information on home, health, and living for today's Maryland parent. This episode will be archived on ChesapeakeFamily.com in video and podcast format. As well, there'll be links to minorities in aquaculture and to Imani. I'm Janet Jefferson with Chesapeake Family Life and Third Floor Views. Thank you so much.
Thank you.